Welcome, everyone, to the FlexPA Claims Data Access webinar. Only a few people on so far. The number is significantly lower than who registered, so we'll just hang out for a bit as people jump on. Maybe as we wait, for those willing, if you want to put your name and who you work for, and maybe why you're interested in this webinar in the chat, that'd be pretty interesting. Okay, silent but deadly. No volunteers. There we go. Great. Yep. Performance reporting with claims. Great use case for claims data. Don't be shy. We'll just wait another minute or two, maybe to 12:04 for us PSTers, based out of Portland, Oregon. But 3:04 for those on the East Coast. Here we go. It's flowing in now. Appreciate that. Well, hello, Pratik. Hello, Aiden, Caleb, Denny, Joseph. Very cool. Great to hear some of this, some general interest, some interest on data fragmentation. Risk adjustment, another good one. Good point, Glenn. Yeah, working with payers. It's a fun topic. Okay, well, it's 12:04. As other people trickle in, they can put their information in the chat. I'm going to have another call to action for that in a few slides. But for everyone else, yeah, I'm Brendan Keeler. I'm head of product at FlexPA, based out of Portland, Oregon. And we're going to talk about the different ways to access claims data, as well as why you would even want to. So, yeah, a little bit more about who I am. Before we talk about that, goals today. Whenever I present, I want to illuminate, I want to teach, I want to enlighten. So, like the G.I. Joe, knowledge is half the battle. It's really important to me that what I'm putting out into the world is useful. So that feedback is appreciated. I like to do some entertainment. I'm not a stand-up comic, but I hope that by being entertaining, injecting some humor, that you'll be more engaged, that you'll retain it better, or that you just say, Brendan, you're pretty funny. Appreciate that. So the Maximus principle. You hear they're coming out with a Gladiator too. That's kind of crazy. And then I don't want to be inaccurate. I want to be as correct. I want to give good information and hopefully not offensive. Humor can quickly trend that way. That's not my goal. So the Dewey principle, avoid inaccuracies, is something I strive for. Like Mario, like pipe delimited things. So that's where I start my career as an HL7 analyst. So HL7V2. I used to love CDA documents. I'm a little out on them recently. but that was a big part of my career, and they're still useful in various ways. And I love APIs uh, most recently. So yeah, I worked at Epic in the Netherlands mostly, a bit domestically with Wellstar and CHI. Worked for Redox for a number of years while living in San Francisco. Worked at Zeus Health, uh, living in Portland, Oregon. And now I work at Flexiba as head of product, still in Portland, Oregon. I also write Health API Guy at Substack.com. So, um, what is Flexiba? Well, Flexiba is the easiest way, we think, to connect identified claims data. So we're going to go through all these routes, and our commitment is to use all these routes to make them easy, understandable, to make sure that identified claims can be used in care navigation, in the financials of a patient's health. Today, that is mostly via patient access. So we'll get into that as one of the main claims data access patterns, but historically, any application organization that wanted claims data couldn't access it. Just wasn't possible. Claims weren't, maybe they were exchanged in really bespoke ways, but not in a uniform way, in any sense of the word uniform. Then there was a CMS mandate. We'll get into this. So that every payer in the nation had to make available their claims via patient access. This is really hard. This takes years to connect to all the payers, as we've found at Flexiba. And so we offer the easiest way to access the patient's claims data for a number of different use cases, such as value-based care providers, health plans themselves, Medicare brokers, care navigation applications, clinical trials, and more. And as this landscape evolves, as we see new methods for claims data access, we're committed to weaving them into a way, making sure that we serve each of these actors in the way that is easiest, fastest, most uniform to do the jobs to be done that they need with claims data. So I already asked this, and a few brave souls have put it into the chat, but if you joined late, appreciate any context on who you are. Who you are drives what you need, and that defines how you do it. So all these methods are just downstream. This is for everything. This is for data standards, and data transfer is the how. And by starting at the how is kind of ass backwards, to use a technical phrase. You have to start with who you are and what you're trying to accomplish, because we're all trying to accomplish different things. A clinical trials organization is drastically different than a value-based care organization. And so if you haven't put it in the chat, just throw in why you're interested, why you're joining today. Appreciate your attention, and I'll try and contextually map it to all the different use cases I'm hearing in here. I'm guessing that you feel slightly like lemon or lime man here. That you're being assaulted with different data sources. You're not able to track them all. Things are falling out of your grasp. And I think you want to be as handsome as a lime guy, but perhaps able to hold all the limes, hold all the claims data that it's available to you today. You can say in the chat if that's accurate or not. So a brief agenda. Why claims? Like, why are we even talking about them? There's so many other data types in healthcare. We'll talk some definitions that kind of underpin these different data exchange methods. And then I'll just bombard you with data exchange methods. And so, yeah, let's dive in. Bamchi Gutham, thank you guys for putting stuff in the chat. Appreciate that. We'll definitely talk about all the APIs, but also non-API methods. And just all the emerging standards and data access patterns. So, why claims? Claims they drive the industry forward, right? Like, as we saw with Change Healthcare, RIP, like claims and claims processing is the backbone of the industry. And so the refuse, the data that's produced as a result of this claims processing, the claim itself, is not just valuable as an instrument for payment. It's actually valuable for understanding a patient's health. It's this clean, centralized documentation of the main pieces of a patient's care talks about the diagnoses, talks about the medications, talks about the encounters, the procedures, the care team in a really standardized way. Because in 19 whatever whatever HIPAA 1996 or whatever, they said you must use X12. You must use this standardized way to document a claim, and as a result, we get standardized code sets, standardized code systems going back to the 90s, to the Clinton era. That's pretty powerful. And so, in addition to that, something you don't get elsewhere is the financial layer. And financial layer is really important for healthcare providers. It's really important for payers. It's increasingly important for patients. So if you're trying to optimize cost, you're trying to think about compliance and identify abuse and fraud. If you're thinking about risk assessments, we saw that in the chat, then the claim is really powerful. Yeah, so what are some advantages? Wait a minute, Brendan, there's a lot of access to clinical data. Why wouldn't we just use that increasingly with the HIEs and other things? Well, it turns out that fragmentation exists in healthcare. I don't know if people have heard this before, but there's data silos, and that's just something that's trending. We're trending towards more and more access, but it still exists. And the nature of care is such that you see many providers over the course of your care. Maybe you're lucky and you're just at Kaiser and it's all one big, it's all it's Kaiser all the way through. But generally, you see many providers, you go to different specialists, you move a lot. And so the records are fragmented across many providers and sometimes in parallel. Generally, most of us have one payer at a time. We are on Cigna. We change employers. We switch to Humana. We age out of employer-based healthcare and go to Medicare Advantage. And sometimes you're dual, you're TRICARE. Sometimes you're dual eligible. But it's much more centralized. All those providers are sending their claims to your payer. There's edge cases, right? Cash pay and things like that. But as a centralizing body, the payers have immense insight into care, and claims are a vehicle for that. So fragmentation, not full check, but slight check. Definitely there's advantages there. Access. Health data is sensitive, so access is restricted. So we're building all these paths to claims data. And so that's the focus of today's webinar, is the access problem. Great, they've centralized it. Now, how do we ensure appropriate actors have access? Completeness. Healthcare is wildly complex. I think the data types I mentioned are just the tip of the spear. It's just the tip of the iceberg, rather. And there's much more. There's oncology and obstetrics and all these wild data types. Health data is way more complex than any other industry. Give me a break, fintech. Like, are you kidding me? Just debits left, credits right. And so claims don't solve the completeness problem, but they augment it. So two main types of use when you're thinking about claims data. Are you trying to provide care, provide navigation of care, or optimize care for an individual? If you're doing that, if you're trying to assist that patient in some part of that journey, if you're a provider who's providing care, if you're a plan who's onboarding a new member, if you're a broker who's helping choose the right plan, a navigator helping choose the right provider or plan, or anyone else in that chain, you want identified data. You want identified data because having patient history and financials helps you do these tasks. Have understanding the claims histories, where they've gone out of network, the providers they've seen, allow you to choose the right provider to go to, the right plan to go on to. On the other side of the ball, I don't know why there's a hanging Chad down here, but forgive me for some PowerPoint mishap. But on the second sort of category for claims data use is analytics. So I want to understand trends. I want to build baselines. I want to compare at the population level. And so pharma wants to do this. Payers want to do this. Providers, employers, and plenty others. And de-identified claims data sets are the most common tool here, just because there's so much less friction and risk than with identified data. So we see sort of divergent, really broad use cases here, but they underpin the two major types of claims data, and underpinning that, different patterns of access. So we're going to go through all of these. And And yeah, like we're just going to deep dive right through them. So lots of acronyms, lots of different programs. Um, it'll be fun, hopefully. Before we do, some definitions. So when we're talking about de-identifications, like what is that? Like what is de-identification? And for most of us, like not really being in the biz, you'll think, well, you just remove all the information that identifies. So that's called safe harbor. And that is one way to de-identify. Deterministically and definitively, you've removed all of the identifying information, you erase it, and thus linking to other data sets is fully de-identified. It's not that usable. Nobody really like safe harbor's fine, but like it's fine for like high level analytics. But like if you don't have their age or you don't have their demographics, it becomes really hard to do the sort of analytics that many people want to do. So there's this other route, which is probabilistic in nature. It's kind of crazy. But really, there's just this like expert elite class of people, these smart statisticians, who sit in the middle and sort of like look at data sets and say, yep, this is good to go. You've removed enough information or you've changed enough information to make it statistically small chance of actually re-identifying. So it's like less de-identification and more pseudonymization. You're not removing all PHI, you're just like randomizing it, generalizing it, cutting off different pieces. And so like safe harbor is a huge part, not safe harbor, but rather expert determination is a huge part of like the business of de-identified data. And um yeah, it's like, but it's kind of crazy when you think about it. Like you have these wizards over here just like looking at data sets and be like, yep, this one's good to go. On the identified side of the ball, there's a couple key concepts when you think about data access. First is attribution. So attribution, um, so question from Elliot Katz, are there public algorithms for inputting demographics and getting expert determination? A little outside my expertise here, but like they're mostly a person doing this stuff. Companies like Datavant have purchased the like have like acquired the company like the main companies that do expert determination. And so you end up running a lot of things through them. Can it be like turned into an algorithm? I don't know. Like it's like de-identification, frankly, I haven't worked with directly. Um, but yeah, like you would hope, I think I would hope that there's a world where it's not, magical wizard expert determinator. Um, but that's just a program. Um, Identified data. So you're the guy in the image, and you're just trying to weave yourself through to get to claims data for your patient or for your member, your employee. A couple of concepts come into play that we'll talk about in different programs. The first is attribution. So if you're a provider, this is specifically for healthcare providers, attribution is the way of saying this is actually the person responsible for a patient's care. So this is sometimes data exchange is only limited to attributed providers. So if you're not an attributed provider, you don't have access. This is really attribution is a really key concept in value-based care. You see with like ACOs. And so attribution oftentimes gatekeeps payment in value-based care. So there's these methods and algorithms that payers have for attribution. It varies quite a bit, but generally well defined. In the fee-for-service world, like what is attribution? Like you just went to see Dr. Smith and paid him to, got a fee for service with him for, surgery on your leg. And then you go to see, Dr. Jones for something else. Who's attributed in the fee for service world? So figuring out that logic is like a little bit more hand wavy and more variable. Two types of attribution. There's prospective and there's retrospective. So retrospective is looking back at care that's occurred and saying, you know what, this is based on the most important claims or the highest volume of claims came from Dr. Smith. You're attributed for the next year. Prospective is sort of like looking forward and predicting out based on different attributes. Network status. So we're all familiar with this. Is the provider in network? Are they out of network? So for data exchange programs with provider groups, network status comes into play and may be limited to only in-network provider. Purpose of use. If you're in healthcare, you should probably know what purpose of use is. It comes from HIPAA, treatment, payment, operations, the big three. Then there's the non covered entity purposes of use. And so oftentimes a statement of what you are going to do with the data is really important for data exchange, not just with claims, but for like all the HIEs. That it's really, really important in that world too. And so somebody who says, I'm going to use this claims data for treatment may have broader sets of data access methods available to them than someone who is going to be using for a marketing campaign or analytics research. All right, now we're going to go through some of the data exchange methods. There's a lot of them, so we're going to fire right through. Feel free to throw questions in the chat. If there's one that's particularly salient to what you're thinking about or working on. So this is me throwing you, Clarissa, the teenage witch, or Clarissa explains it all. I don't know which one this is from. I'm a 90s kid, millennial, but throwing all the programs at you, it's going to be a lot of fun. So first up, we're going to start in the de-identified world. So there's a couple different classes of and options available to you. The first is a really logical one. It's the de-identified data aggregators. So these big old aggregators sit in the middle and receive a bunch of de-identified data, or maybe they have a business associate agreement and they're able to get it and then de-identify it. And then they package it up, they pay money to the data sources, and then they sell it to buyers. So they'll sell it to clinical trials, they'll sell it to life sciences, to public health agencies in that de-identified fashion. So maybe from payers are just a subset here. They might buy it from clearinghouses. They might buy data from providers. So this area of the world is sort of like, it's sort of opaque is the way I see it. It's sort of, they're not, the aggregators aren't really heavily incentivized to talk about where they get all the data from. And so it's sort of like that guy selling you a bunch of watches, like, okay, it's a good watch, but like, how'd you get it? I'm not saying they stole it, but it does feel very opaque, especially compared to the identified data world. But it serves a purpose and a HIPAA-defined purpose to facilitating the sharing of de-identified data is allowed under HIPAA. And so data sets can go well beyond claims. They can include clinical data. All the data is de-identified, typically using an expert determination method. Is it possible to re-identify? Absolutely. And I think that's the craziest thing is that there's a big trust element to almost all data exchange. And for every type of data exchange that exists, there's a chance of abuse. And so there's definitely the chance for abuse in this world to re-identify inappropriately. Yeah, so the data is typically in a flat file format. It's not really standardized. Everything's variable in this world. And I thought this quote from someone I was talking to who works more in this was really said, dealing in this particular vertical industry is the closest I've ever felt to waking up next to a horse head. Wild stuff. Can't confirm it myself, but it does feel opaque to me. Question from the audience. When will self-directed access to patient health records and claims data be possible through vendors like Flexpa and Health Gorilla? Currently hearing that EHRs like Epic are blocking this. Ooh, a lot to unpack here. Okay, so Health Gorilla provides access to clinical data. They use a health information network. They use health information networks. They are an on-ramp to health information networks. So Care Quality, Commonwealth, TEFCA, these are all the networks and have their own network rules. Patients' access to clinical data historically has been through an authentication, typing in your username and password, which is painful. This is changing. TEFCA is allowing for sort of strong identification and then facilitation of pulling of clinical data through these networks, through TEFCA. That is launched. That is technically possible. The ubiquity of that network, in connecting to all provider sites, that's what's up. Has everyone switched over to TEFCA, turned on TEFCA? No. And so like that's the big problem for individual access services. To your second point, claims data, when will payers be participating in TEFCA? No one knows. No one knows. That's really far out. And will claims be even part of it? Like hopefully that pathway claims is available through that pathway. But that's nascent, if even like the most beginning stages of nascent. So self-directed access to patient health to claims data is possible today, and we'll get to how. But that's identified data. So I'll tell you when we're going to talk about that again. Okay, so sitting sort of like next to or adjacent to the aggregators, where you just sort of like pile in all the de-identified data, is sort of like a record location for de-identified data sets. So payers and other entities send up core demographics of their patient populations to a group like Datavant, for instance. Datavant tokenizes the PII. So they turn it into like this hash so that they can match it and link it while not giving away the patient's identity. And so then buyers like clinical trials, life sciences, et cetera, send in their patient populations, but they do the tokenization and then they match. And they act as a matchmaker between the buyers and the sellers without sort of like pile all the data into Datavant. It's kind of nice. It's kind of a nice record location, de-identified record location service. So they are the matchmaker, right? Swipe left or swipe right if you want data from Aetna. They help organizations buy claims data from sellers that have the records. And so, yeah, they're just like a different model for the same aggregator, same sort of aggregator service. A lot of the aggregators actually use Datavant and things like that to tokenize and help identify buyers. Lastly, in the de-identified world, we're going to talk about all payer claims databases. So at the state level, states are saying, you know what? We have a lot of authority to force people to sort of aggregate de-identified data and help researchers and other nonprofits and things like that do the things they need to. So it's much like the aggregators. They say, okay, let's get your claims from Cigna, Humana, et cetera. They're required to submit them, and then different parties can submit a data access request. So the researcher, the hospital, the teaching hospital, and then Mr. Forkey, the capitalist. And depending on the rules of the state, they will either accept those data access requests or they will deny them. So they denied Mr. Forkey, the capitalist, because it's not what they're trying to do. And so then they'll give those claims data sets to the approved parties. So this is a super variable space because it's dependent on each state. Just like any sort of thing that's run at the state level, it's really hard to categorize and generalize because they're all so different. So some may exclude different types of healthcare insurance plans, self-funded plans, worker comp plans, TRICARE, the VA, et cetera, might not be included in the data set. Some might have really restrictive data access agreements. Some may have really broad and expansive data access agreements. Do all payer claims databases have commercial claims data? That's going to vary by state. So commercial can be fully funded or self-funded. Typically, states can get fully funded. Fully funded falls into their jurisdiction. ERISA, so is whatever 19, I think it's like a Carter era law, and that allows really carved out this principle of preemption, meaning that states don't have that much jurisdiction, rather authority, to say when employer has a self-funded plan what the to do. So like some have found ways and loopholes and things like that to sort of regulate self-funded plans, but oftentimes you'll see those excluded. Um, I'll pay. It's generally a flat file in format, so a CSV, a comma separated value file. There's a push for actually a common data layout, so that'd be sweet. We love standards. And yeah, so it's a nice alternative. It's because like something about the aggregators and these networks and things is that it's expensive. If you're a researcher, if you want a small sample size of in population, like just not really like the commercial aggregators and things like that are really expensive. You don't have 20K or 50K to spend on these data sets. You may only want a few patients, like a small sample size to prove something out. And so all payer claims databases can be a powerful alternative. It just varies by state. Okay, now we're into the identified world, which is more of like my domain and what I know more about. These are all the things we're going to go through. So I made a little table in case it's useful to you all after this presentation to reference and compare and contrast. But let's go through them. So the OG data exchange program is CCLF, claim and claim line feed files from the CMS. So the CMS is the largest payer in the country. I'm not sure everyone knows that, but they are by a large margin. And they have a lot of data exchange programs for claims. They're really good at this. CMS is really good at a lot of things. And this is one they started a while ago. Basically, the way it works is an accountable care organization, ACO, so it's in this value-based care arrangement. They see Gertrude, the woman we see here, many times. The ACO bills CMS for Gertrude's care. The CMS uses their attribution logic and say, this ACO is responsible for Gertrude. And then on a regular basis, they give claims flat files identified for the populations that the ACO serves. So who is it? It's the CMS attributed population. It's this text delimited file format. It's monthly in cadence. So it includes Part A, Part B, and Part D. So, the medical claims and the pharmacy claims, some demographics, and a summary. And so ACO has been using this pretty successfully for years, but it's gross. It's a flat file. So maybe we can do better. Thus enters BCDA. BCDA, Beneficiary Claims Data API. This is exactly the same in concept as CCLF, except one, it's FHIR. So it's a FHIR format, the very hot standard in healthcare. And it is weekly. So instead of monthly, it's a weekly cadence, and it includes pre-adjudicated claims. So that's kind of nice to get insight a little further up the adjudication in the adjudication process. So if you're an accountable care organization, you're an ACO Reach and a few of the other programs with Medicare, you're probably already using this, or you're probably already using CCLF. You may want to switch over to BCDA. If you're not using either, you're sort of doing yourself a disservice, and maybe you don't have a fully mature analytics program. Probably worth your attention to start doing this, or finding a partner that can help you do it. So it leverages bulk FHIR. So bulk FHIR, I initiate a request, it processes async, and an ND JSON file is returned back to me. So anyway, yeah, this program works really well. CCLF before that worked pretty well, but people wanted FHIR and an API. So next up is the most lengthy and mouthful. So CMS AB2D, which is actually kind of neat that it explains what it is in the acronym. It is giving medical claims. The CMS is giving medical claims to the prescription drug plan sponsors, the people that sponsor the Plan D, the pharmacy claims in Medicare. it's providing data to them. So Gertrude signed up for this, this prescription drug plan. They let the CMS know that she's enrolled. They get to pull jobs, but they pull fire about her medical claims biweekly. It's specifically for this type of, if you're a prescription drug plan, standalone Medicare Part D prescription drug plan, then you should probably be doing this, and you probably already are. If you're not, then it doesn't matter. What's super interesting about this one is it was required by law. So like Congress was like, yo, CMS, you need to do this, which they really don't do for all these APIs. Like this is really kind of the only one to like really say, hey, you have the authority to go make this happen. And I just have to imagine there's an intense amount of lobbying by prescription drug plans to make this happen. I really wish Congress, if there's any congressmen listening to this, either live or in the future on YouTube, why don't you do this for APIs that are more impactful? That would be great. So the previous programs were for prescription drug plans and for ACOs. What if you are neither of those? Well, CMS has a program called Data at the Point of Care. This is for fee-for-service providers. So if you're a provider who is not doing an ACO approach, but is doing fee-for-service Medicare, this is intended to give you some level of access to claims data at the point of care. So Dr. Fee-for-Service sees Gertrude, submits a claim, they attest, right? They're saying, because fee-for-service, it's kind of murky. Do you have attribution? Do you really care for them? They do this promise. They say, I attest that I have a treatment relationship. The reason I'm asking for data right now is treatment. And they send up these FHIR resources, patient, provenance, group, up to the CMS. And then the CMS can export weekly, just like BCDA, all the FHIR data for their populations. Limitation here is that it's on hold. It's been on hold since July of last year. There was a pilot for a while and some organizations were doing it, and they ran into roadblocks. They ran into problems because the organizations attesting to this level of access, are they actually a provider group? Are they a vendor? That sort of stuff is really, I think, throwing a roadblock into them rolling this out more broadly and giving all of fee-for-service access. And so hopefully they're able to figure this out. Could be very powerful to allow fee-for-service clinicians to have Medicare claims data at the point of care. Now we get to going back to the mysterious T in the chat, self-directed access to claims data. On the claims side, the first way to access your claims data was for Medicare populations. So Gertrude is using a healthcare app. She logs into the CMS and authorizes access for that healthcare app, and she can pull claims data and coverage from the CMS. So they pioneered this. We access this at FlexPub. So Medicare is one of the payers we connect to through the CMS Blue Button 2.0 program. It is a great API. It is great documentation and a great team. And it allows beneficiaries, Medicare beneficiaries, to direct their access of direct access of their health data to the applications or organizations of their choosing. That may be an app. That may be a value-based care organization. That may be a payer. And so with that individual consent, that username and password, they're able to effectively share data to the apps of their choosing. CMS said, you know what, this was awesome. We love this. This was great to enable for Medicare fee-for-service. Why don't we do it for Medicare Advantage? And thus, CMS 9115. So the patient access APIs were made by really a stitching together of a lot of different authority. There was no direct act from Congress. The CMS did this of their own prerogative based on some of the sort of like looking at the Cures Act, but with no direct authority from it. And they said, let's make sure everyone who's in a Medicare Advantage plan, a Medicaid plan, an Obamacare plan, an ACA plan, that anyone on a CMS regulated plan has access to their claims data and any clinical data that the payer may have for that patient. And so, similar process. Gertrude's now she talks to a broker. She moves on to Humana. She's on Humana rather. She logs into Humana and pulls down her information, and then she's able to pull this information into the application of her choosing. And so when you use Flexpa, you're seeing the breadth of that connectivity, connecting to all these private plans, the Medicare Advantage plans, the ACA plans, the Medicaid fee-for-service and MCOs, and pulling that data to wherever a patient wants. So we've aggregated all those. That's really what we've spent the last year and a half doing, is battling through the payer developer portals, the different deviations of OAuth and FHIR and things like that, and making sure there's clean, reliable, stable access such that our customers can use Flexpa to access the patient access APIs as well as CMS Blue Button. And so this is really powerful. This is really enabling, and this exists today. But the CMS is not stopping there. They're looking at BCDA and DPC, and they're saying, that was good. Let's have that happen for all the other plans we have authority over. So in a similar fashion to kind of BCDA, we see that a provider like Dr. Fee-for-Service will be able to pull down populations that they care for, assuming they're attributed properly. So this is coming out in 2025. It's not in place today, nor have we seen, there's only a handful of payers that have a sandbox up for this. And it's going to help clinicians access the claims data from their from their payer partners. So it won't include financial data. That's a notable difference from other claims data access patterns, but it will include that clinical data. So claims with no financials and then clinical data, again, for Medicare Advantage, Medicaid, CHIP, and ACA. And so it's going to be for in-network providers. It's going to be subject to the attribution processes of each payer. So we'll really have to see what that looks like. But this is something that we plan at Flexpa to layer into our offering, because for providers, it's going to be really powerful in combination with the patient access APIs as a fallback. So giving it a more frictionless access to claims data. How does CMS 0057 work in state-managed Medicaid operations? So for the Medicaid fee-for-service operations, they are subject to this regulation. The jury's still out. Their implementations have been notably laggard. So if you're looking across for CMS 9115, the most non-compliant groups are the state Medicaid agencies. And that's just because their sales cycles, their processes are quite slow, one. And two, it's not the type of group you want to put pressure on, right? You're not trying, it's easy to go to a private Medicare Advantage or a Medicaid MCO and say like, hey, you should be doing this, because they're commercial entities. For the fee for service, they're just doing their best, and they're slowed by process and bureaucracy. So we'll have to see how it's going to work, but they are subject to the rule. They will have to make provider access APIs. Great questions, Vamshi. The other aspect of CMS 0057 is payer-to-payer APIs. So as Gertrude changes MA plans, her claims history can follow her. So she's switching from Humana to United. She has not heard about the Change Healthcare data breach. She just is following her recommendations of her broker, and she provides consent. So this is an opt-in. This pair-to-pair API. As she's onboarding, she provides consent. and they are able to pull her and anyone else who's consented in a bulk fashion from United via Fire. And so again, this is future. This is not 2025. Sorry, both this and the prior one are 2027. I wish it was 2025. Um, and this will allow data to follow individuals across health plans. And this will be radically enabling of health plans to be able to prioritize care and help their members and assess risk. And so, yep, again, it's MA, Medicaid, CHIP, ACA. Uses bulk Fire, and it's primarily for payers onboarding new members or payers with members who are in multiple plans. So especially impactful in that context for dual eligibles. You might be in a Medicare plan and also a Medicaid plan. T asked, can you clarify whether the CMS patient access APIs could specifically be used by third-party, say, app vendor to provide a CMS-related patient view into the longitudinal clinical data? And what about stitching in clinical data from commercial employer-sponsored plans? Yeah, great questions. So all of these CMS regulations, the authority of the CMS is not over commercial plans. They cannot regulate fully funded plans. They definitely cannot regulate self-funded plans. They cannot regulate FEHB or TRICARE. So those are not mandated. Some payers have opted to voluntarily put all lines of business into these APIs. So Anthem, shout out to Anthem, Elevance, like they leaned into this big time and are a very large payer. And so as an Anthem, if your employer is, has Anthem, or if it has signed you up for Anthem, you can actually access your data. Same with Kaiser. But that's not mandatory. That would be a tri-agency ruling that would require the Department of Labor, the Department of Treasury, and the CMS to get together to create a mandate. To be pretty unprecedented in some ways to do this. Alternatively, Congress could authorize this, give authority to one of the agencies and a prerogative to go and do this. That would be awesome too. So Congress, if you're listening to this, please do that. So that's the state of things. At the state level, states like California are pushing these APIs and saying that they must be across all lines of business. So if you're living in California, that goes into effect in 2025. Okay, so outside of that, another way to get access to claims data is with a direct payer relationship. So if you're a value-based care practice, or maybe you're an employer, and you have a close relationship with Humana, you set up this, let's use the provider example. You set up a value-based care agreement with Humana. You see Gertrude as their primary care provider. You get that attribution in that VBC relationship. Humana may provide you these custom flat files. So this is similar to CCLF, but in contrast to CCLF, it's an absolute cluster because it is very variable. Each payer has a different process for this. It may be monthly, it may be weekly. The files are really, really variable in their formats, in their quality. There may be random columns thrown in at, as soon as you've figured out how to process the file, they throw in a new column. Yeah, and so it's the alternative kind of to the provider access APIs. It's what's available today if you have that really close payer relationship, but it's just the immense variability and pain. You just need these intense QA processes. So if you're a City Block Health or an Oak Street Health or Iora, these groups, you probably have these huge teams that are dedicated to processing claims data from these direct payer relationships. Likewise, if you're an employer, and you're large, you may be able to gain access to claims data in this way, and similarly have challenges. So if you're not one of those things, like let's say you're a business associate application. So let's say you're a financial application that has a business associates agreement with Dr. Smith. You want to get claims data, right? You're trying to like optimize for Dr. Smith all the claim stuff. all the financial stuff. So claims is a great source of that. So your paths are, as Humana and other payers send things back to the PM system or the EHR, maybe they can rebound it to you. So some EHRs can, sort of receive that and then send a copy over to you. That's not always possible. So sometimes you go to another EHR and you sort of have to sit in between Humana and the EHR and then push it into the EHR. And then sometimes you're just shit out of luck. There's just no possibility. The payer and the clearinghouse can't send you anything, and the EHR can't rebound it. For that reason, like all integration, if you're an application that sells to providers, integration is universally hard. But the hardest of hard modes is integration for financial apps. And that's typically because a given health system has a lot of clinical apps surrounding, like orbiting the EHR, and they don't really have a ton of financial apps orbiting the EHR. They might have one or two. So the methods of outputting data aren't as well developed. There's not as much demand from the customers of the EHR, and so there's just not ways to do it. So it's really painful. But like you just have to sort of assess with your provider partners what's available from your EHR, what's available if you can sit in between their feed of X12, or if you have to do some scraping or other methods, you have to get really messy. So the last thing here is if you have that direct provider relationship, sometimes you can go to their clearinghouse. So you sign up with Dr. Smith, you say, you know what, I'm gonna I have a relationship with him. Can you send me a copy of the claims? And so then in addition to sending the EHR, they might send you the X12. Not every clearinghouse is that advanced. They may have a web portal. You may need to use that relationship with Dr. Smith and sort of use their login and go and scrape claims data. And then again, you might, depending on your clearinghouse, there's a lot of them. Some of them are pretty shitty. Again, I'm gonna go for the trifecta here and dunk on Change Healthcare. Like we saw that even the best, considered some of the best, can go out of business, or not out of business, but really be struck down. And so there's way worse ones than Change Healthcare that exist out there that have less advanced capabilities. So if you're a business associate application, this is one path to get data, for the live feed of claims and remittances, and sometimes the claims history specific to that provider organization. And so it's usually an X12. It's usually, that legacy format, or maybe you have to do some portal scraping. Anyway, that is I've been throwing fastballs and curveballs at you. Your brain is overflowing. About half of you have probably left the webinar. But thank you all for attending and follow me through this crash course on all the different claims data access patterns. If you're saying, I want more, teach me more, give me more, yes, I will send out a copy of the deck. And you know what? I will, let's just do it live. Let's just put it right in the chat right now. What do we think about that? So we're going to do it right now. We'll send to everyone in meeting. There you go. And other pieces right here, just to, if you're like, I'm interested in claims data, the fragmentation of health data by Datavant. That's a great one on the de-identified side. Datavant's an excellent company. I highly recommend talking and checking out their content. Out of Pocket has a great Claims 101 course. So, if you're willing to pay some money and just go deeper on how to use the data, it's less the access, it's more like using it, spelunking through it. I've done it. I'd recommend it. And then Tuva Health, they're a great open source tool for chopping up claims data for just, for the analytics in an open source way. So if you know DBT, it's much like that. Really big fans there. The community there is vibrant and awesome. Would recommend it. Anyway, if you have questions, oh, yes. Oh my God, I need to make the link public. Anyone with the link. There you go. And I'll just make sure you can all comment if you see anything. And then I will send out a copy, a PDF copy for those who are not fans of Google's products and slides. And if there's any questions, please reach out. If you're interested in patient access, if you're interested in the easiest way to access identified claims data, so FlexPA, hit us up and let's have a conversation. And if there's anything else that you'd love to see us present on in the future that's adjacent to this, would love to have webinars that meet people's needs. So with that, I'm going to scan the chat real quick. And that's it. We'll put the recorded session up on YouTube and on our Substack. Thank you all so much. Have a great day, afternoon, and week. See ya.